there is a very large boom, and that's heard on the ground, and it can literally break windows.
The sonic boom is a continuously produced explosion of sound, the result of shock waves generated at the front and back of the plane. On the ground, it's heard as two bangs as the aircraft passes overhead.
There was anxiety in the cabinet about the bang, and so on one cabinet occasion I told the Prime Minister I was going to bring Concord over at midday. So as we got to 12, I was getting a little bit nervous, and then I heard a bit of a bang, and people were sort of slightly shaken by it, but it wasn't as big a problem as anyone had thought.
Concord's designers also thought her booms wouldn't be too much of a nuisance.
I believe the element of alarm will be absent. It's a very characteristic noise, the double bang. There's no danger of people mistaking it for their mother-in-law shooting themselves.
But tests on the public were not encouraging. And when Concorde flew down what became known as Boom Alley along the west coast of Britain, thousands complained. One Scottish woman alleged that the booms had made her pregnant by interrupting her rhythm method of contraception. The sonic booms spelt disaster.
There was no way that any government was going to allow a supersonic airplane to fly routinely over land. And in so doing, it effectively cut about half of all the world's routes away from Concord.
It was a devastating handicap for a world sales tour.
We were trying to sell it, so we were concentrating on the sales. The problem was there weren't any sales.
Not a single one. Bad news, as Concords were now rolling off the production line. Worse followed. Airlines cancelled their 74 aircraft. Concorde was too noisy, too expensive, too costly to service, and too thirsty in a world facing rising oil prices. Everyone had decided to buy 747s.
No true private commercial airline bought the aircraft. They saw the business model and they realized they weren't going to make money on it, so they didn't buy it. Plain and simple.
The French and British governments had one last option: to sell Concorde to their own national airlines. But with empty sales books, they smelt a bargain.
I had to deal with British Airways, and there was not the slightest doubt they screwed me to the floorboards. I mean, basically, we gave it to them.
British Airways took delivery of 7 shiny new Concords, and on the 21st of January 1976, prepared to take their first passengers supersonic. But there was turbulence ahead. American protesters had persuaded the New York Airport Authority to ban Concorde on grounds of noise.
Concorde's survival depended on its permission to operate between London and New York and London. It had to have the blue ribbon route.
So would the environmental movement finally wreck the supersonic dream? The age of supersonic travel had arrived. Almost. New York's Airport Authority was refusing Concorde permission to land. Local residents were up in arms about noise from her engines. The Emergency Coalition to Stop the SST led protests and drive-slows at JFK. Eventually, it was agreed Concorde could make one test flight. On the 19th of October 1977, Air France pilot Jean Franqui and BA captain Brian Walpole flew to JFK. Without this crucial transatlantic route, Concorde's future would be in ruins.
And we landed at JFK. There were people down the side of the runway, people along the taxiways, and we were then taken into the moment of truth. We were briefed on what sort of press we were going to get, and we were warned that they would be hostile. That turned out to be a masterpiece in understatement.
Now, another question, gentleman at the back.
One of the very early questions was, how long, Captain Walpole, will it take you to deafen our children with your aeroplane? At this stage, at the back of the hangar, the doors opened and the Concord was tractored in. Everybody looked round, and as they looked round, you could hear the gasp, the sighs, oh! And the whole of the tenor of that press conference changed as people were heard clearly say, oh, isn't that beautiful? What an aeroplane. Now, that was a moment in Concord's life that I will never forget, and a moment in my life that I'll never forget.
But Walpole's ordeal was not over. The following morning, Concord had to run the gauntlet of the noise monitors. Walpole and his team had spent a year devising a cunning way to outwit them.
The manoeuvre that we did, we're climbing to 50 feet, 25 degrees of bank, throttle back, continue the climb. It was so successful, didn't even trigger the noise monitor, let alone get anywhere near the unacceptable level.
Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Grant Walpole, and welcome to Concord and our supersonic operation from London Heathrow to New York's John F. Kennedy.
Now, at last, Concord could fly the premium route it so badly needed, taking passengers from London to New York in just 3.5 hours, less than half the time of a conventional jet.
My first flight on Concord, we were waiting for takeoff at the end of the runway, and I thought to myself, do I really want to work on this aircraft? It's a bit like flying in a missile, it's so fast. I thought, too late now, girl, we're off.
Okay, gents. 3, 2, 1, now.
We took civil aviation from 600 miles an hour to 1,350 miles an hour in one single giant stride.
Concord is just in a class, in a league all of its own. It was the sort of Grand Prix racing car of the flying world. It was very powerful, it was incredibly responsive. You could just fly it with your thumb and your forefinger.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Captain Walpole, just to let you know how the flight is progressing, and the answer is quickly.
And I eventually mastered the technique after a couple of slips of carrying 15 or so champagne flutes on a silver tray, so as not to have a trip.
Coming up to Mark 1, Mark 1. There we are, ladies and gentlemen, we're through Mark 1, the speed of sound, no bumps, no bangs, Concord. 44,000 feet now. The aircraft will gradually climb as the fuel is consumed and the weight decreases, and continuing the acceleration towards the magic of Mark 2. Mark 2, twice the speed of sound.
At this speed, most passengers remained blissfully unaware Concord was expanding around them. Friction with the air heated the fuselage from a freezing -56 to a boiling 127 degrees centigrade, stretching it by 8 inches.